In today's video, I'm going to be getting into the final set of balance changes for March Season 69. They have changed a little bit since the work in progress balance changes. They decided to drop these finalized changes at 4 a.m. my time, so I was obviously sleeping. So if anyone in the comments is like, you're a little later than usual, that's exactly why. They're already going to be live in-game as we speak, so be ready. The first change that's different from the work in progress balance changes is the arrows nerf. The arrows are still getting nerfed, but it's a different kind of nerf. Originally, they were reducing the amount of damage the arrows dealt to crown towers by over 50%. But now they're deciding to nerf the radius of the arrows instead. The reasoning is reduced radius to prevent unintended crown tower damage. So the radius is being reduced by 13%, going from 4 tiles to 3.5 tiles. And I think this is a very good change. And this is what other people were saying as well. It didn't make sense to kill the crown tower damage by that much, and a radius nerf would make more sense for the arrows, and they ended up listening and doing it. So I think that this is a solid change, and the arrows will still be a viable card for sure after this. The second difference from the work in progress balance changes is the log nerf. Now, they're keeping it a similar nerf, it's just not as big of a nerf because it's still going to have decreased crown tower damage to align with other spells. Before, they were reducing the crown tower damage by, I believe, a whopping 50%. I think it was almost as much as the arrows were, but they decided to reduce it to minus 24% damage to towers instead. So this is going from 58 to 44. I think that this is a better change overall because it's going to make the log worse, but it's still going to be a very viable and consistent option, especially in cycle decks. There's no way that this is going to kill the card. It just might make other spells like Snowball a tiny bit more viable as an option instead. The third difference from the work in progress balance changes is the way that they're nerfing cannon. Originally, they were nerfing the damage that the cannon did, but now they decided to change it to a hit speed nerf. Their reasoning for this is reduced attack speed while maintaining effectiveness as a defensive distraction. I guess part of the reason why they didn't want to nerf the damage is it would have changed some interactions. For example, the cannon wouldn't have been able to one-shot goblins, which is a pretty strong unit, and they didn't want those interaction changes to happen, which is why they decided to go for a hit speed decrease of 10%. So it's going from 1.11 to 1. This is definitely going to be a very noticeable nerf, but I don't think it's going to kill the card, especially because cannon is probably the best building in the game currently. Now, it's a bit debatable because some people were saying it was just the evolved cannon that needed a nerf and the regular cannon was fine, but we'll see how it plays out. There's one more difference from the work in progress balance changes, but I'm also going to do a recap for the things that are staying the same for those of you all that didn't see it the first time around. The rage is still getting its nerf. The effect duration is being reduced by 50%, going from 2 seconds to 1 second. What this essentially means is once a unit leaves the rage circle radius, it's not going to stay raged up outside of the rage radius as long anymore. It's going to be half of that time, if that makes sense, because just reading these numbers might sound a little confusing, but that's essentially what it means. And they actually, guys, decided to add a Rune Giant nerf. They originally weren't going to do this, but a lot of pro players especially were complaining about it and saying that it was still too strong, which is why it's now in the finalized set of balance changes. The enchantment now persists for 5 seconds after destruction. So its hit points are also getting reduced by 11%. So they actually decided to give it 2 nerfs. It's going from 2,803 hit points to 2,508. That's a really big nerf to her hit points. And then the buff linger time is going from none to 5 seconds. So basically, after she dies, the enchantment does eventually wear off. This is a very big nerf to the card, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's almost dead after this change. The Electro Wizard buff is still staying the same, can now eliminate spirits with dual attacks, so that's an interaction change that's going to help it out drastically. He's going to be a lot better against cycle decks now. The damage is being increased by 5%, going from 110 to 116. The Evolved Giant Snowball is still keeping its buff as well. The extended slowdown duration improves effectiveness against buildings. So it's also going to be better against buildings, not just units. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The slowdown duration is being increased by 33%, going from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. I would not be surprised if people use this card instead of the log, especially after the log nerf. So there might be more variety in small spells now. The Royal Chef buff is staying the same as well because they figured he's by far the worst tower troop and the nerfs he received completely killed him. So this is going to be a partial reversion of previous nerfs. As you can see, the minimum cook frequency is being increased by 14%, going from 1 pancake every 24 seconds to 1 pancake every 21 seconds. The minimum cook frequency also, in other words, means going from 0.042 to 0.048, and then the maximum cook frequency is being increased by 14% as well. In other words, 0.025, 0.029. Didn't realize we'd be having a math lesson here, kind of joking a little bit. But anyway, the maximum cook frequency being increased by 14%, 1 pancake every 40 seconds to 1 pancake every 35 seconds. Not a super large buff in my opinion, but definitely going to help him out a tiny bit, and maybe he'll be viable in 1 or 2 beatdown decks again. And then the princess change is staying the same as well. They call it a bug fix. So essentially the first hit speed converted to deploy time for better bridge interaction. So the deploy time is being increased by 20%, going from 1 to 1.2 seconds. What this essentially means is you're going to have more time to react to her when she's placed at the bridge, and now she might not get a single shot if you have good reaction time. So that's a pretty good change because that's something a lot of people complained about, and it's not going to make her now as oppressive as a win condition, especially if you're paying attention to when she's deployed. But then her first hit time is being decreased by 40%, which is technically a buff, going from 0.5 seconds to 0.3. So in some situations, she's going to be worse, and in some, she's going to be better. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how this plays out. The Void rework is staying the same as well. Hopefully this rework means a small buff, because whenever they say rework, it's either a nerf or a buff. It doesn't mean it's going to stay the same. That's kind of the whole point of a rework, and it's definitely one of the worst cards in the game. It says shorten time between strikes and reduced overall duration for more consistent targeting. So the hit speed is being increased by 30%. It's going from 1 hit every 1.3 seconds to 1 hit every 1 second. And then the hit speed is being increased 30 seconds, so 0.8 to 1. And I guess what this essentially means, as I explained before, is each strike comes down faster now. So now the opponent isn't going to have as much time to react and maybe get something down before that second strike comes in. So you're more likely to get that larger strike off that deals more damage before they place another unit down, where it splits up the amount of damage you get. So this is definitely a small buff. I don't see this reviving the card too much, but it's definitely going to make it a tiny bit better probably. Well, those are all the changes. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe. If you guys are not subscribed already, you can use creator code BOSS to support me in any Supercell game. Let me know in the comments below, what do you guys think of these changes? And thanks again until next time, guys.